want to share a secret with you. I started my career as a software engineer, and I never felt I'm really an extraordinary software engineer. I felt I was good, but not extraordinary. And eventually that led me to realizing that what I'm passionate about and what I want to do is actually lead rather than code. And that kind of brings me to today's guest, Brittany Greenfield. And she shared in the episode today, there was a moment in my career when I realized I didn't need to write code to make an impact in tech. That changed everything for me. And to be honest, I very much relate with that because that changed a lot to me as well as my career journey. So hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of From a Woman to a Leader, a podcast dedicated to discussing unique challenges of women in the tech industry. I'm your host, Limor Bergman-Gross, and for those who don't know me, I started my career as a software engineer, eventually grew into leadership positions and was a director of engineering. And today I follow my passion, and my passion is supporting women in tech, help them navigate their challenges and grow into leadership roles and executive roles, and basically fulfill their aspirations. And today, as I mentioned, I'm super excited to have with me Brittany Greenfield. And Brittany is a cybersecurity expert and the founder of Wabbi. Wabbi is a company transforming a way development and security teams work together. And in this episode, Brittany shares her inspiring journey into tech, how she transitioned from studying biotechnology to leading in cybersecurity, and why she believes everyone can have a tech career without needing to write a single line of code. So we'll talk about how to align your passions with career in tech, and Brittany shares practical tips for getting your foot in the door. This is a conversation you don't want to miss. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfy, and let's dive right in. Hi, Brittany. How are you?
Good. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. It's wonderful seeing you today. I love your background, by the way.
Thank you very much. I'm actually in the mountains, so that's why you get my sort of rustic pictures. So it's nice. I like the color, especially we spend so long at our computers all day. Having little pops of colors is a nice way to jazz up the day.
For sure. And why don't we start with you? Maybe tell us a little bit about your journey into the tech industry.
Yeah, it's certainly, I think, like a lot of people's, not necessarily a linear path into it. I was lucky to grow up in a tech household, so a lot of it was dinner table conversation, but I never thought I'd actually go into technology myself, right? I actually studied biotechnology and pharmacogenomics, but the more I studied that, the more I had a passion for how technology drove innovation in economies. And so I joined the tech industry out of college at a time that I had to explain to my friends, one, what a startup was. It was not a common vernacular thing. Two, that I was working in the cloud. And they were like, so you're working for the weather service? So I was like, can you just give it 5 years and all of this terminology will be normal for you? And, I think one of the biggest challenges was that I actually am a comp-sci dropout. I thought that you had to write code to be able to go into a tech career. And I realized along the way that I was a technical person and you didn't have to write code to be a technical person. And I think that opened up the lens of opportunities for me in technology roles.
Incredible. And thank you so much for sharing that. I think we'll definitely want to double down on that. I mean, that you don't have to write code in order to be in tech.
Exactly.
Before we go there, maybe you can share what inspired you to transition into cybersecurity.
Yeah, so I'd always been in enterprise software, and I was actually in the ERP space. And for those that aren't familiar with that, that's like Oracle and SAP, and I was working in networking for Cisco, looking a lot at IoT. And when you talk networks and IoT, you realize that you can't realize the full value of technology unless it's secure. And I absolutely fell in love with cybersecurity. One, because, as I said before, it helps us realize the full value of the innovations we create and be able to use them to the full extent. But the second is cybersecurity is this big world of a lot of intellectual curiosity. And all you have to do is be curious about what innovation is and how you're going to solve it. And you sort of always have to be one step ahead of the latest innovations, because if we're going to use something, we have to know how to secure it first. And so that was it. So made that transition. I got into the endpoint space, which again, for those that might not be familiar, endpoint in its most simple form is like antivirus on your computer.
Hmm.
And then from there, I realized, there's I call it the alphabet soup of cyber, and I wanted to get much more to the foundations, and so I got into the application security side, which is what led me to found Wabbi.
So tell us about Wabbi and
Yeah,
how
so
you started it.
Yeah, so great question. It's not enough to have a good idea. You have to have a good idea at the right time. And what Wabbi is a platform that orchestrates DevSecOps processes. So really, what we do is integrate security into software development pipelines, which may seem simple in today's modern world, but you're actually really dealing with two very different cultures and process sets when you start to deal with development and security. Development, if we think about agile and sprints, right, it's what's good enough to get out now and what can be fixed later. Security, going back to antivirus as an example, is very binary. Bad, stop. Your antivirus doesn't pop up and go, this is badish. Would you maybe like me to quarantine it later? No, it says, this is bad. If you have a problem, we stopped it. If you have a problem, talk to somebody about the policy later, but we've stopped it for now. And so it's really bridging a gap between those two teams, so the teams can continue to do their jobs in the way that's
Hmm.
most productive to them, while being able to de-silo the data and information and tasks between them. And that's where, as I mentioned, I got into the world. This is part of the world of application security. And when I realized that 9 out of 10 breaches begin due to defects in code, yet 90% of organizations start their security processes after code is already in production, I realized we got to go back to the foundation. That's where Wabbi came from.
So you identified a need
Yes.
and maybe a gap.
It Yeah, so it was a need, a gap, and market timing, and I think that's the other thing, right? There are a lot of people that have great ideas, right? I'm not going to say great ideas are a dime a dozen, by no means, but you also have to make sure that the timing is in place. And when I founded Wabbi, I realized that what was happening was, even though DevOps had been common parlance for us for a long time, organizations were finally finishing their DevOps transformations. And so they'd been able to take this sort of band-aided approach to security as part of development. And here it was about to very quickly fall apart. Lots of manual processes, lots of guessing, quite frankly, a lot of human knowledge required. Hey, what happens when this kind of vulnerability shows up? Oh, call more, right? And so I realized that as I was actually looking, right, because there wasn't, when you're starting a company, there's not necessarily a lot of data on it, on that market. So you have to look at the surrounding markets, and DevOps was really the big driver of that for us. And said, okay, let's go build the platform so that as organizations finish their DevOps transformations, we are ready for them, to be able to say, look, it's a simple integration. This does not have to be a headache for you.
Hmm. And how did you go about starting Wabbi? I mean, I'm curious. I mean, for women out there that that have maybe some bug in their head, like, oh, I want to start something out. How do
Yeah,
you do that?
it's, I think the first thing is you do have to come up with, as I said, identifying a problem, understanding that there is a gap in delivering on that, and then making sure the market timing. But more tactically, I like to call it my personal board of advisors. People that, they're friends, they're the people that I can lean on. They may or may not have industry expertise. And I talk to them. It's as simple as that. Should I do this? And they really helped me, say, to identify the fact that I had, first of all, come up with those three things, right? So that it was the right time to do this. The second was, you could take 1,000 classes on building a startup, but until you go to do it, you don't know what you're doing. And there's a reason you get repeat entrepreneurs being successful. And they helped me outline the practical steps I needed to do. Get a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
Sign up for some of these communities where you can go brainstorm with other founders, and leverage their resources. And what I did was, having worked for both startups and large organizations, I actually said, and I think this is a key advantage in how Wabbi came to actually understand the product we had to develop, was I didn't have a product for the first 6 months. I did customer advisory boards, right? Because I wasn't writing the code. I said, before I pay somebody to go write the code, we need to know what actually is going to solve this problem. So I got down to old wireframes, eventually hired an interactive wireframe designer so that way we could put it in front of prospects. And it was great that I did that, because if I had just gone out and hired somebody off the bat, we would have developed a Me Too product that would not have solved the problem. So the really important thing that I think people forget, because you get so jazzed when you start your company, is that you need to actually go talk to your potential customers to understand how they need this solved, because they're the ones at the end of the day that are living this.
Wow, that's wonderful advice. And it kind of ties nicely with what you mentioned earlier, that you don't have to write code to be in tech.
Yep.
And you mentioned, oh, I didn't write the code, because I think that a lot of times maybe women think that, oh, I can start a company like only if I'm technical, if I
Right.
write a code myself. And as you mentioned, like, you don't have to. So,
Exactly. It was actually one of my greatest fears, to be a non-code writing, a non-code writing founder, right? And people go, "Oh, you've got to have a technical founder," and it actually took me some coaching for people to say, "No, Brittany, you are technical." Right? There's a difference between writing code and being tech, and being not technical. You are a technical person. This is what you have built your career around, and I think that's really important when women think about whether starting a company or just getting into a career in tech. There's so many different ways to align what you do with tech. Like I said, cyber and tech in general really is a lot of on the job learning, right? There's no specific curriculum for saying this is what technology does, right? And you could say, hey, I'm interested in, actually, one of our engineers, his daughter is in college, and she is a comp-sci psychology major, right? And she
mhm.
happens to, on the side, like to draw. Want to know what that's going to be? Great. A great UI UX. Now, she happened to do comp-sci, but she didn't need to, right? Hey, and we had a PM that was actually just a graphic artist, right? Because they understand human behavior. So I think getting into tech or founding a company is about taking a step back and saying, how do my interests and passions really align with the problem I'm solving? That's it, right? Think about the problem you're solving, and then you'll find how your skills actually can support that.
That's wonderful. And I think the word skills are super important here. And for the women listening to us, can you share maybe some example, Brittany, about, what kind of skills are a fit for what kind of roles? Like, if you have some
Yeah,
examples.
absolutely. So like I said, the classic example I always like is, are you, if you're interested in design, UI, UX, psychology, well, that's product management, right? Product management is about understanding the needs of your customers and how you actually translate that into features. Are you Are you somebody that actually likes talking about market research? That's actually marketing. I think people forget about that. The word market is in marketing. And, do you like
Mm-hmm.
going out and observing trends of the market? You could even say, like, are you interested in philosophy? Well, maybe you need to go into quantum computing, right? If you think about quantum computing and that, or game theory, well, that's cybersecurity, right? Thinking about how your adversary is going to move. So, more tactically, the little things that you do, it could even be that, hey, you're a mother re-entering the workforce, or maybe you're just the planner in your group. Well, you'd be a phenomenal customer success rep. You want to know what customer success reps have to do? Stay calm in times of crisis and guide people to a solution. And I think that's really important. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with the stat that women feel they have to meet 90% of a job rec
Yeah.
in order to apply for it. I myself have fallen into this trap where I've gone, oh, I don't have 3 to 5 years of marketing experience. That had nothing to do. I had more than that experience from job experience. And so, again, I would say when you're looking at a job or getting into tech, don't worry about the job rec. Think about what the desired outcomes are and how you can support those desired outcomes.
That's wonderful advice, and I want also to share for employers that they should also be open-minded and consider candidates that maybe are different than what they have in mind, and not tick the specific boxes they thought they should.
100%, right? I think one of the number one ways we can increase diversity is through our job recs. And it's something that we've been very proactive with at Wabbi, is how we write those job recs for the outcomes. Every now and then there is something tactical, like I need you to know JavaScript, right? But other than that, it's really about the experience you bring. And life experience comes in many different flavors, shapes, stories, timelines, and that's what you should present on a job. And you're completely correct. That one's completely up to the employers. And also in startups, let's stop calling everybody ninjas and rock stars, right? That's not necessarily right. A lot of people don't resonate with that either. Talk about the fact that, hey, startups actually have flexible hours a lot of times. That's a great way to get more maybe working moms into the tech workforce, because if you have some of that flexibility in terms of hours that you can work. But yeah, 100%. That is number one thing employers can do to increase diversity.
Yeah, and some interesting fact. I was last week in a community event for the local kind of LinkedIn community here in Israel, and the head of the Israel LinkedIn Talent Solutions spoke there, and she said that skills are going to be like the number one things that you have to highlight on your LinkedIn profile
Yep.
instead of like the traditional job description, right?
Correct. Right. When somebody connects with you, 100%, and talk about what you bring to the table. And that's what a skill is. I think people have gotten confused about my skill are the to-do list of things I can do. That's not your skill. Your skill, so here's how I describe what my skill is. My skill is, have you ever seen Mickey Fantasia? Mickey dressed up as the sorcerer?
No, I
It's a
haven't.
classic, but he stands there. He steals a sorcerer's hat, and he stands on top of a cliff or something, and he makes hippos and brooms dance together, right? And
Yeah.
that's what I describe as my skill set. Is I can identify a market opportunity and say this is how we need to go get there, and here are all the disparate pieces and how they need to actually work together, right? And so that's my skill set. That is not a to-do list of things I can do. I'm certainly not putting the sorcerer's hat on every day.
For sure. And do you have any advice for women who, how you can, so basically, you have to identify your passion and your skills and then try to figure out, okay, based on who I am and what I'm good at, what are some potential career paths that are right for me? Do you have any tips about how can women do that? How can they figure
I,
out what
yeah,
roles are a good fit for their skills and passions?
absolutely. This is actually, talking about LinkedIn, this is 100% where social media can really come into play. Don't be afraid to go do research first, but go use social media to your advantage. I will always respond to a LinkedIn message where somebody says, "Hey, I'm trying to better understand what your career is or how you got into it. Can you please spare 15 minutes?" Now, you have to write that note, but again, social media opens up the world to a bunch of people. By the way, this can happen at any point in your career. I have friends that have been in tech for 15 years that decided to take a potential change in career, and they went and did this, right? It's a listening tour. And people are always willing to give the time because somebody gave them the time. And this is where LinkedIn, quite frankly, expands your network so much greater and helps you reach people you never would have before. So I think that's actually the number one way, is just connect with somebody that's in that job.
That's a wonderful advice, and yes, I would definitely agree with you that people, yeah, some may not respond, but many people
Yeah.
are very friendly and like to help, and they would love to share what they do. As you said, like you don't ask for much other than
Right,
a few minutes
right,
of a
right. 15
conversation to
minutes.
understand.
Exactly. Keep it concise. Keep it truly to 15 minutes. If it goes well, somebody will give you more time. And I think the other thing is, and this is going to be sort of a what not to do in a positive sense, is I think everybody's out there looking for this dream mentor. Mentors will fall into your life at the right time. You'll have you'll have chemistry, you'll have shared interest, whatnot. Don't go out saying, "I have this ultimate mentor." Search. That will happen naturally. Again, like, keep it concise, do your research, come in with pointed questions. People will be giving of your time. And also, to the more your point, I mean, if somebody doesn't respond, don't get discouraged either, right? LinkedIn is also a spam black hole sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a numbers game eventually. I mean, I had a guest that, one of my previous guests, she did a very bold move. She moved from India to the UK. And before she did that, she started reaching out to, I think, over 1,000 of people, over a
Yeah,
thousand people. And eventually, most of them didn't respond, but that's okay. And,
right.
and, and actually, it builds resiliency, like to be able to face rejections.
Yeah.
So there's another plus for that.
It is. I have a friend. I had this text chain with her just yesterday. She's changing in her companies, and she got the high of the initial responses, and then now has the low. And she's been doing this for a long time, and she's very senior. So that's just human. But you're right, right? It builds the resilience. In anything, everything's a funnel, right? And to be able to
Yeah.
get to those sweet spots at the bottom of the funnel, you got to expand the top of it. And that just means that for every 100 emails you send out or LinkedIn messages, you're probably only getting one response.
Yeah. And let's say I wanted to ask you a follow-up question. So let's say you talk to some people and you figure out, well, maybe this, as you said, customer success. I'm just taking that as an example. That may be the right fit for me. But this woman, I mean, she doesn't have experience in customer success. Maybe she worked in a completely different field. Maybe
Right.
she was a teacher. Who knows? Like
Right.
maybe she's trying to transition from something completely different. And we all know it's very difficult, right, to get a foot in the door. Do you have any tips of what this woman can do in order to get her foot in the door?
Yeah, first of all, and not your time is always valuable, but again, same with this reaching out on LinkedIn, reach out through your network. A lot of times people, especially startups, are always willing to say, "Hey, look, I've got sort of this side project. I'm willing to let you learn on the job a little bit." So be
Mm-hmm.
willing to take. Actually, that's one of our best engineers. Um, uh, she was originally in more of a sales engineering role, and then wanted to transition into code, knew how to code lightly, said, "Look, I'm looking for a modern development set, that sort of thing." And we said, "Sure, we'll hire you as an hourly intern, right? Find a way to say, I'll de-risk this for you.
Yeah.
And so that way I can get some of the on the job learning experience, and then maybe one day we can turn it into something, right?" It's also an easy story to say, "Hey, I was just doing some hourly work, and that's why
Yeah.
I'm leaving this company."
Yeah.
Startups tend to be the most flexible in this, because there's
Mm-hmm.
always some project sitting on the side that nobody's got time to do that they would love
Yeah.
extra support on, and love an hourly resource that may not be a full time commitment. So that's one. The second is, again, goes back to pulling together the threads of your story for the recruiter or the hiring manager or whatnot. I'll go back to your example of teacher to customer success. Well, I know I've been a teacher, but customer success is another form of teaching, right? So just again, think about, get that. And this is where, again, you can reach out to find out who your own personal board of advisors is. You could even, again, probably if you've connected with somebody on LinkedIn, maybe even test that out and ask people for their advice, how they got it. Say also, right, in this sort of discovery journey, this listening tour that you're having, you'll find most people don't have linear paths into their careers, right? One of the best people I know in cyber was an Olympic swimmer, right? And got out of that and said, "What am I going to do?" And there was this interesting job, right? So, but she actually is more on the customer success and account management side, right? Discipline, and that's what an Olympic swimmer brings. So I think again, take that step back, prepare your journey and your story about your journey, and that don't let other people decide what your narrative is. Be specific about your narrative when explaining that.
Absolutely. Those are incredible strategies. And I also think that today it's even more important than maybe before to really build connections and not just adding a connection on LinkedIn, but just getting to meet people without maybe the immediate need for, oh, I'm looking for a job, so why don't you hire me? Rather than, hey, as we said earlier, right, to interview people and ask what they're doing, but just to connect with people and try to get to know them. You never know what
You
that will.
never know. So as you can imagine, I get a lot of random LinkedIn requests. I toss out 2/3 of them, but if somebody that's sort of tangentially in the space that's not spamming me to sell me something, I actually respond myself for this reason. I say, "Hey, what interested you in connecting with me? Would love to schedule a time to talk." And so it goes both ways, right? Like there's a benefit in that, and I think take advantage of it, but be meaningful in it. Do not just connect. I hate when people connect with me without an agenda and that I don't know, right? I know some people just want to have all the connections. No, make sure that they're meaningful and take advantage of the fact that it is easy for us to be sitting how many thousands of miles away right now and having this conversation. So you can do that too. People are looking to connect, quite frankly. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. Especially nowadays, when people are working remote, I mean,
Yeah.
they're looking to connect even more than they used to, and I would say even go out of your comfort zone and go to some networking events. That's what I did last week, and it's very uncomfortable for me usually. But just get to meet people at your area or virtually. I mean, I'm sure
Right.
that there are a lot of virtual meetups.
Yeah. There is 100%. Then the meetup.com is great for finding meetups. Go find something that you're interested in, right? Like, that's, talking about how you get a foot in the door. Go meet somebody at a meetup in an area that you might be interested in going to. Nobody likes networking, right? I
Yeah,
know that, right? It's tough. We all feel that way. And I think especially, being a woman at some networking events, a lot of times in tech, we feel like the only person in the corner. But the good news is no, everybody's awkward at networking, and it's worth putting yourself out there a little bit and going through that pain because you never know who you're going to meet.
yeah. Although for me, it always feels like, oh, I'm the only one who is awkward.
I
But
feel the
yeah,
exact same way, and I have to
but
turn on a different piece of my brain. And last week I was on a panel last week, and they're having a luncheon afterwards. So I'm going and trying to do the networking, and I'm standing in the corner going, I just spoke in front of a room of 100 people, and yet I'm afraid to go sit down while somebody's eating and introduce myself, right?
I know it's intimidating. I can very much relate to that. But it's a skill worth having, and it's worth to kind of, as you said, like, okay, I'm gonna do it, even though it feels uncomfortable, even though it feels intimidating.
Correct.
Intimidating. I'm still gonna do that and put some smile on
E
and get some
exactly,
courage and approach people.
exactly, and you never know what you're gonna learn, and, maybe you don't hit it off, but you could do it, I promise.
Absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit about your work at Wabbi and how you kind of how diversity plays, in your kind of company. If you
Yeah,
can share that.
it's it's always the question being a female founder,
Yeah, for sure.
and for me, diversity is really important. I talked about cyber and technology in general being places of intellectual curiosity, and diversity is about more than just the picture perfect postcard. It's about different approaches in thought and how you solve problems, and I think that's critical for innovation. That you do want, and so for us diversity looks in different ways, right? Obviously we want to make sure we have women working in our organization, different people of different background. It also means different educational experiences, different ages, because that all changes how people approach and problem solve. We have a developer that didn't study computer science, but rather was a gamer and was interested in learning how the sausage was made, how he got his
Hmm.
gaming experience. So taught himself how to code, right? That is a very different experience than somebody that went through a traditional 4-year degree and maybe did co-ops and whatnot, than is the person that's been in tech for several decades and came out of sales engineering and wanted to go back and relearn more modern tech stacks, right? And so that's where that diversity really changes how we problem solve, right? It changes the conversation that you have. I think that's also, you know, um, as we think forward on AI, really, really critical, right? Because at the end of the day, AI really only represents how we think, how we talk about things. I don't know if anybody's played with any of the image generation. I like to use Adobe Firefly a lot, and I was doing a presentation and I wanted a female CISO, right? Because you really people can't be things that they can't see. And so I plugged in my brand file and I said, generate me a picture of a female CISO, and it came back with a guy with clearly a women's styled ponytail. And that was it. And I went, okay, let me take out my brand image. Let me just start with the female CISO. Nope. And you go, you kind of look at pictures of female CISOs. You either get these stock images of women being presented in a very a artistic way. I'll put it nicely. Low shirt, whatever, or you did. There's only a handful, and I think that's where the diversity is. In the states right now, women's sports is all the chatter, right? And if people can't be what they can't see, so again, it's not about getting that picture perfect postcard, or it's about finding the way to make sure that there's good representation in your organization so that you have that diversity of thought as well as externally as well.
Absolutely. And Brittany, before we go, I mean, any final thoughts or messages you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I would say one of the things we talked a lot about, sort of the journey of getting into tech, and especially if it being nonlinear. I'd say one of the big things, especially as a woman, because I think we think it's a disadvantage, is don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to say, here's what's on my mind, or I'm afraid to go network or reach out about a job to a total stranger. Because if you're not willing to talk about your problems or your fears or your I don't knows, right? You're never going
Yeah.
to be able to solve them. And there's this great community out there, and that everybody's gone through the same thing. So don't be discouraged, but rather, be willing to open up a little bit, because opening up a little bit can take you very far, or forward very far. And I'd say that's the biggest thing. Don't be afraid. Don't feel that you have to isolate yourself as you go on this journey, because it's going to be better when you solve it together.
That's a great advice. And where can our listeners connect with you or follow your work?
Please do feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I meant it.
Mhm.
If you tell me why you want to connect, I'm absolutely always up for a conversation. And then, obviously, if you're more interested in the security side of things, you can reach us at www.wabisoft.com. But I hope to hear from you. I really mean it. It takes a village, and so don't be afraid to connect with me. I'm happy to help however I can.
incredible. And I'll put the links on the show notes. And thank you again, Brittany, for talking with me today. It's what a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the episode with Brittany. And before you go, I want to give you a sneak peek for next week's episode. If you ever felt stuck in a cycle where no matter how much money you earn, it never feels like enough, I think next week's episode is for you. And I'm meeting with Hannah Beer, and she's a money coach and the author of Wealth from Within. And Hannah shares her unique approach to creating a blissful relationship with money, one that's rooted in emotional healing and abundance. We'll dive into the tools you need to clear your journey, to clear your money blocks, and finally feel at peace with your finances. Plus, there is a live coaching session that I've done with Hannah that you definitely don't want to miss. If you like this episode, I want to encourage you to share it with a friend or anyone you think it's going to be helpful for. And subscribe to this podcast so you never miss out another episode. Visit my website to subscribe to my newsletter. It's limorbergman.com/newsletter, where I share new podcast episodes, but also weekly insights, especially for you. I want to thank you so much for listening and want to wish you a wonderful day.